Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm your host, Mac Pritchard. I'm also the founder of Mac's List. It's a job board in the Pacific Northwest that helps you find a fulfilling career. Every Wednesday, I talk to a different expert about the tools you need to get the work you want. Life has changed dramatically because of the COVID-19 virus, and you may believe you should stop your job search during the pandemic. Our guest today is Biron Clark. He encourages you to keep looking for work during these difficult times, and he has practical tips for how to do so. Biron is a former executive recruiter, and he's the founder of CareerSidekick.com. His advice is read by more than 1 million people per month. Biron joins us today from Panama City, Panama. Biron, here's where I want to start. Why should people keep looking for work during the COVID-19 pandemic? I mean, aren't most employers not hiring?
First, thanks for having me. That's a really good question. I think quite a few employers are not hiring right now, but from what I've seen, many still are. And really, the only way to guarantee you won't find a job is to stop searching. If you do that, you have no chance of finding a position. So I do recommend continuing.
Well, Biron, a lot of people, not surprisingly, might decide to stop job hunting for health and safety reasons. What would you say to a listener who is thinking about that?
I think health and safety comes first for you and your family. When I talk about job hunting in this situation, I'm talking about doing it digitally, networking digitally, applying for positions online, and then even having interviews online. From what I've seen, most of the companies that are still interviewing and talking to candidates are doing it via video platforms or via phone. So that's the way that I recommend doing this right now.
What about people who have jobs? Many job seekers in normal times, for example, have a position and they're looking for maybe something different, a new opportunity. Do you think a listener who's employed now, given the uncertain times we're living in, should stay put for now, or should they keep looking?
I think it's great. If you have a job now, you're in a better position than a lot of people. But if you wanted something else or wanted something better, however you define better, I think there's no harm to looking now. I think it's a good time to be networking. From what I've seen, people are more open to hearing from you now, more receptive to receiving a message, even if you haven't kept in touch with them for a number of months. I also think it's a great time to negotiate to go fully remote or prove yourself to your company. If you have any desire to be a fully remote employee or work from home employee, once all of this settles down, now is your chance to establish that and show them that you're reliable and producing a lot from home and that you're somebody who could continue to work from home after all of this, if you want that.
It's an interesting point because there is an opportunity there to expand those remote roles. What about, I'm just thinking about potential job seekers out there, professionals who might have been laid off. Presumably their goal will be to find a new permanent job, but do you think they should change their strategy in the short term? Should they consider temporary gigs or even project work?
I think that's a great approach. You do need to, if you filed for unemployment, if you're in the US, you do need to check with your state guidelines, because I believe that in certain states, any type of work whatsoever may disqualify you from receiving those unemployment benefits, those weekly or monthly payments. So that's one thing to be aware of. But I do think freelancing or consulting or finding a way to use your skills that you built in your full-time job and taking that as a way to earn income now in a slightly different way, I think that's a great idea, as long as you know I don't know if consequences is the right word, but the repercussions of doing that in your state.
Your point about unemployment benefits is an important one, and they do vary from state to state. And you could see a reduction in benefit, obviously, if you're receiving income from another source. So I'm glad you brought that up. What about expectations, Biron? It's always challenging to manage expectations in a job search, and given the competition out there for a much smaller number of positions, what kind of expectations do you think job seekers should set for themselves?
I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think it's changing week to week in terms of what employers are doing and what the economy is doing. So I think you will need to be patient. You will need to be persistent, but I think it's going to change week to week. So for that reason, it's still worth continuing to apply. And I mean, it's hard to do, but I would say maybe don't focus so much on the long term and don't worry about your expectations of 2 or 3 months from now, because nobody really knows. But again, if you're applying, then you're going to be in that first group of people that the employer does call, whether they're just fine tuning their phone and video interview process right now and looking to start back up next week with their interviewing, or whether it's a month from now, or whether they've already begun and it's business as usual and they're continuing to interview. You don't know for each employer, or you can't be certain. But if you just focus on your daily goals and daily tasks and weekly tasks, I think that's the best approach now, rather than thinking, what's going to happen in 3 months, or if I job search now, will I have a job offer in 3 months? Where you might, it's possible you wouldn't, but I still think that's the best way to go here.
I like your suggestion that you do something every day. You have a recommendation, given these crazy times we're living through, how much time people should spend on a job search? Is it something you recommend, just maybe an hour a day, or just doing something, 1 or 2 things every day? What do you think is best right now, Biron?
That's a good question. I think everybody's life is different. Some people can spend 6 hours a day. Some people have 5 young kids running around at home, and just different things, to different limitations, different things going on. But I think if you ask yourself each day, what are the 1 or 2 most important tasks that I can do? I think that, and if you just do every day, if you do 1 or 2 high impact things, I feel like that's a really good way to make real progress in a couple of days or a couple of weeks. That's how I run my own business, actually. And sometimes one of those tasks might only take a few minutes. It might be like one really well thought out networking message to an old colleague who has connections in an industry you're thinking of pivoting into, for example. And so that's one LinkedIn message, but that's a really high impact task that could potentially bring about like a really meaningful result, which is a job interview, rather quickly.
I like that example you shared. Are there other examples of high impact tasks that a listener could take? Recognizing that every search is different, of course, but are there some things that stand out to you as you write about job search and work with clients?
I think planning, and especially if you were laid off, it might be really tempting to, like the first day home or the second day home, you might be tempted to just send out like 100 job applications on job boards, because it feels like you're being busy. It feels like you're solving the problem. But I would really recommend spending 2 or 3 days planning and thinking about which industries are still hiring and which are not, really being more strategic about it. And you can use job boards for that, actually. You could go, let's say you're a staff accountant. You could go on a big job board, type in staff accountant for the title, search the whole US maybe. And then you could see all the jobs posted in the last 7 days or so. You'd look at those and you'd see which industries are represented most in those job postings, and then which industries don't seem to be posting jobs at all for staff accountants. And now as a staff accountant, you have a really good idea which industries to target. And so that would be a day where you didn't send out any applications, you didn't email your resume to anybody. But I feel like that's really productive, and that'll make your future days a lot more successful. So I would be strategic, plan ahead for a few days.
That's a great tip for finding industries that are hiring. The obvious ones right now as we record this are service employers like grocery stores or warehouses. What are your other tips, though, to find those companies that might be hiring that might not be apparent, that might be hiding in plain sight, besides looking at hiring trends on job boards?
I think networking is the way to go for that. No question in my mind. Networking will allow you to hear about companies that are hiring. Like you said, they haven't posted anything on the web yet. It's not public, but they are hiring, and networking is how you can find out. And like I mentioned, I think it's actually a really good time to be doing online networking because people are just more patient and understanding and open to hearing from you. People are, people don't have their guard up. People aren't skeptical. People aren't doubtful when you message them. It's much more of at least in the communities I'm in and the people I've spoken with, it seems like the whole feel now, just in terms of like the LinkedIn online community and other groups of professionals, it's just much more like, how can I help? Who needs what? Who can I connect with and talk to? So it seems different now, and I think that's one advantage.
I want to talk more about networking, particularly how to do it virtually. And let's get to that after the break. But before we take a break, Biron, one question I see a lot online, and I get from job seekers as well, is remote jobs. What's your best advice for finding employers who are looking for remote workers, and probably always have, and how to get in front of those employers?
It's a great question. Those jobs are competitive, but they're definitely worth pursuing. There are a number of really good remote-only job boards. So I might spend a little bit of my time, if I were job searching, I would spend some time looking at the employers on those job boards. I would also search, I think in the past, I actually looked for fully remote jobs myself when I was working full-time as a recruiter, but I wanted to be able to do it from home. And I started searching Google for terms like remote companies, fully remote companies. Another term they use is distributed companies. A lot of employers who are completely remote, they refer to themselves as being distributed or a distributed company. And you might come across some interesting lists that way as well. I think LinkedIn also just started a couple months ago. They have a remote job search. So if you search for a job title in LinkedIn, you're searching for jobs, for the location, you can put remote rather than putting a specific city or even country. You can put remote, and then you'll only see remote jobs. So I think LinkedIn's a really good way to go as well. And that's relatively new. Not a lot of people know about it yet. I think it was a couple months ago that they rolled that out.
Those are great tips. We're going to take a break, Biron. And when we come back, I want to talk about networking, how you do it virtually. But I also want to start out by hearing what you're seeing about how employers are hiring differently in this COVID-19 world. So stay with us. When we return, Biron Clark and I will continue to talk about how to look for work during the COVID-19 pandemic. The world never stops changing, does it? But one thing never changes when you look for work. Employers want to see your resume. Before you apply for your next job, you might ask a friend to look at your resume, and you should. But wouldn't it be great if you could talk to an expert too? Our show's new sponsor, Top Resume, can help. Go to maxlist.org/topresume. You'll get a free review of your resume from a professional writer, and you'll get instructions about what you can do next. So you can use this advice to fix your resume right away. And no worries if you're on a short deadline. Top Resume will get back to you in 48 hours or less. Go to maxlist.org/topresume. Getting a second opinion about your resume could make the difference between getting the job and getting rejected. Why take a chance? Go to maxlist.org/topresume. It's free. Now, let's get back to the show. We're back in the MaxList studio. I'm talking with Biron Clark. He's the founder of CareerSidekick.com, and he joins us today from Panama City, Panama. Now, Biron, before the break, we were talking about how to look for work during the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's talk about job hunting itself. What does a listener need to do differently now because of COVID-19?
Well, I think I hinted at a few of the same things I would think to recommend here earlier, but I think you really need to be strategic. And if you take like a blanket approach and just try to mass email resumes, I think it's not going to work. So starting with research, thinking about your job search from like an industry or broad economic level first, and then going down to trying to find individual positions. And then I really can't emphasize networking enough. And tailoring your resume so once you decide which industry to look in, or once you identify maybe 3 or 4 positions that look nice to apply to, I would really recommend taking the time to fine-tune your resume to fit those positions. And you can tweak it further before applying for each job, but I call it creating a master copy of your resume, or a master resume that's tailored for the general industry or type of job you want. I think sending out a generic resume right now without doing that is just a recipe for failure. I think you really need to be doing that even before COVID, and certainly after. I think it's necessary.
You've mentioned networking several times now, and I'm a big fan of networking and recommend it strongly. And you've talked about people's receptiveness to hearing from others. How do you recommend people network differently in the world we're living in now? I mean, obviously, you can't suggest meeting at a coffee shop or going to someone's office. So, what do you recommend to your clients that they do instead?
So, I think keeping it completely digital, of course, for health and safety. And it depends on your prior relationship with the person. But if you're trying to reconnect with somebody who you haven't spoken with in a while, which is the more challenging thing, if it's your best friend, you can just call them. But if it's somebody you don't know too well, I think just sending a message on LinkedIn, if you're directly connected there, or sending an email if you have their email. And I almost think this whole COVID pandemic is almost a good excuse to get back in touch with people, where it might have been awkward before, or you might not have known what to say before. Whereas now, if you're reconnecting with a past colleague, you can say, you can check in and say, "Hi, how are you doing? During these few weeks at home, I'm trying to reconnect with past colleagues. I hope you're doing well and staying safe. I've heard about a little bit of turbulence in your industry. How's your company holding up? I hope things are doing really well for you, or going really well for you." That's an example of like a really non-threatening, casual first message to restart a conversation. You don't want to ask for anything big to start, and you want to show some interest in them. So it's nice to ask how they're doing. But then from there, you could start to gather intel, ask their opinion about how their industry is doing. You could say you were thinking of trying to pivot into their industry, but you thought they would have better insight into how it's holding up so far. Everybody likes to share their opinion or share their advice. So that's a much easier thing to ask for and get a response for, rather than asking for a huge favor right away.
You mentioned doing this by email. Are you also seeing people network using video like Zoom or Google Hangouts or other services?
Absolutely. Yeah, I like a written message for the first message. That might just be because I come from most recently as a recruiter, I was recruiting in tech. It's very casual. People like to type rather than hop on the phone when they have a choice. But depending on your industry, or depending on the people a phone call or a video call could be great. And I think even for me, or even for like a typical tech person, after you've connected via 1 or 2 LinkedIn messages, then definitely you could suggest hopping on a Google Hangouts call, Skype, Zoom, WhatsApp, depending on what country you're in and what's popular there. I think that's a great next step, and you feel a lot more connected that way. You feel like you really spoke to somebody and saw somebody.
And you mentioned making an ask right off the start. And if it's a friend, obviously there's a relationship there you can build on. But what if it's somebody that you've been referred to that you don't have a friendship or history with? People might feel awkward asking for help with a job search during these uncertain times. How do you recommend approaching that, either in an email or perhaps through a virtual coffee meeting?
So I think if you were referred, then that's actually a great thing for you, because this person who might have been skeptical of you or might not have even answered you now, they're going to be a lot more likely to answer you. But the key thing you should do is really, like, very soon in the conversation, or very upfront, immediately mention the person who referred you. So if you're emailing someone named Susan, you'd say, "Hi, Susan. John Davis gave me your contact info. He suggested you'd be a great person to talk to about blank." Right? And as soon as this person reads that, their guard's going to be down. They're going to be like, "Okay, I know John. Clearly, he thought I could help. And they're going to read the rest of your message a lot more closely. But even if you were referred, I would ask for something small still. Ask for their opinion, ask if they have time to connect briefly via a call to discuss further, but don't ask for like an introduction to their VP of HR when they don't know you. Don't ask them to stick their neck out for you in that way before building a little bit of rapport and then talking to them.
It seems as if in the last few weeks there's just been an explosion in the number of Zoom calls or video chats that so many of us are involved in. Do you? I'm curious, when networking in this new world, do you recommend doing it largely by video, or are you a fan of the old-fashioned phone call, or does it not make a difference at all?
That's a tough question. I feel like it depends so much on the industry and the person. I will say this: I think in general, you feel a lot more connected to somebody after a video call. I think you could have like 10 phone calls with somebody and you feel like you sort of know them, but after one video chat and just seeing their face and seeing their facial expressions, you really feel like you know them more. And I've heard people talking about that and researching that even when it comes to like YouTube videos versus written articles online or podcasts. And I've seen and heard a lot of people say that they really feel like they know the person after watching a few of their YouTube videos. Whereas I don't think anybody feels like they know me after they read one of my written articles online. So I know that's a bit of a different example, but I think if you want to really be memorable and really bond with them and feel like you got to know them almost like you were in person, then video is the way to go. I really recommend video.
One of the tried and true networking techniques is to go to events. And obviously those aren't happening in person right now. What about virtual events, Biron? Online meetups or professional Zoom happy hours? Do you recommend taking part in those? And how can someone who does go both make the most of an event like that and then follow up with connections or speakers after the event ends?
I definitely recommend. I think that's great. I absolutely recommend going. I think you should make note of the general topic of the event beforehand, and then maybe write one or two questions down just on a pad of paper to yourself. And one way to make the most out of the event and maybe meet some new people and have people know your name is ask those questions. So you'll be getting help with things you're actually wondering about. People will also know you, hear you, see you. One trick that I learned a while ago from a freelancer is before asking your question, you can also introduce yourself. So I could say, hi, I'm Biron. I'm a recruiter. I focus on the Boston and New York markets. My question was blank. And so that's just an example of how you can give people a little bit of sense of who you are and what you do before your question. Also follow up with people after. Look at who else attended the meeting. Maybe if somebody else is in your industry, you could like send them an invitation to connect on LinkedIn. And I know that might sound odd, but I think it kind of fits the theme of what I was saying earlier, where people are just more receptive to that now. And what might have been odd 6 months ago, I feel like now with everybody sort of feeling like they're in this together, I don't think people would look oddly at a LinkedIn request after a group event about how to battle COVID, like as a job seeker. You know, there's the camaraderie, and I think people would be receptive to that.
I think you're right. I do have some speaking myself, and I'm always receptive to LinkedIn requests, especially those that include a very brief note. You know, I attended your recent talk, or your webinar, or heard you speak at this virtual meetup, and would just welcome the chance to connect. And that's a chance to the suggestion that your friend made, the freelancer, to talk about yourself in one sentence and just get your face out there. So I love that idea. We've talked about who's hiring, how to find them, how to network. We haven't talked much about the application process and interviews, and we are running out of time. So I do want to ask, what is your number one virtual interview tip? Because most interviews right now are happening via video or phone, but they're happening online. What do you recommend people do Biron, to stand out? And what's the biggest mistake you see people make on video interviews?
Okay, I'll share some ideas that come to mind. You can let me know if this addresses what you're getting at here, because I think you want to eliminate distractions, obviously, with your video interviews. So shut the windows and set up a microphone that sounds good. Make sure your webcam is at eye level. Make sure there's a light behind the camera kind of shining into your face. You don't want a light behind your head shining into the webcam, if that makes sense, because it'll sort of black out your face. But I think once you get all of that done, and let's say it's a Zoom interview, you should do a test run. Try to do a mock interview with a friend or family member. But once you get that out of the way, focus on the actual interview, because at the end of the day, it's no different. And they want to hire the person who's the best fit for their role, the most excited, most prepared to come in and succeed in this role. They're not looking to hire the person who's the best at setting up their webcam. So I'm not saying to bypass any of those important preparation steps. They're super important, but just don't get so caught up in preparing the technology and the laptop setup that you forget to really prepare for the interview, because I think you should go in there knowing more about their company than anybody else they've spoken to. Just research them so much that nobody else knows them like you do. Go in there with amazing questions to ask, questions about the job description, showing that you clearly studied the job description, things like that. Does that get at what you were asking, or is that a little bit off of what you wanted?
No, I think that's terrific, and it's been a great conversation. So, Biron, tell our listeners, what's next for you?
So this is the first year in a really long time where I'm just doing more of what's worked in the past. My goal is to write 100 new articles for careersidekick.com, my website. There are already 200 articles there. So looking to do 100 more, and I'm just doubling down on what's already been working for me in my business.
Terrific. Well, I know people can find those existing articles and the ones that are coming up by going to careersidekick.com. And you also mentioned before the show that you're open to connecting with people on LinkedIn. So I hope people will find you, listeners will find you there as well. It's been a great conversation. Given all the useful advice you've shared today, what's the one thing you want a listener to remember, Biron, about how to look for work during the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and you hear a lot of statistics going around of how, it takes X number of months to find a job, or you need to apply for X positions to get one interview. And I think the message I would want to leave people with is you only need one job, and it's easy to get caught up and worried about the statistics, but at the end of the day, you just need one. And so much of it comes down to what you're doing. So I would really recommend focusing on your actions, your activity each day, networking, just the things that you can control. Because if you hear an average you might hear it takes 6 months to find a job. But within that broad average, there are people finding a job in 2 weeks, and there are people taking 2 years. And you don't want to be in the 2-year group. And so much of it comes down to what you can control. So I would focus on that, and you'll find the job sooner than later.
Do you want to learn more about Biron and other guests on Finding Your Dream Job? Sign up today to get our free weekly podcast newsletter. You'll get links to the guests and resources mentioned in every episode. Go to maxlist.org/podcasts. Again, that's maxlist.org/podcasts. Next week, our guest will be John Sullivan. He's a human resources expert, author, and speaker. John also teaches at San Francisco State University. Our economy is going through big changes because of COVID-19, and this affects how employers hire and people find work. John and I will talk about how looking for a job has changed forever, why this is so, and what you can do about it. I hope you'll join us. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job.